Hello. Welcome. Hello. Thanks you guys for coming on in this tonight. Welcome. I'm going to go on and get started. Hello and welcome to part 4 of our series Becoming Cleoria Dunn, inspired by our former First Lady Michelle Obama. Last week we discussed 2 words, cowardice and inertia. Those 2 words were introduced by Dorothea Brand in her book, Wake Up and Live. And she said you have to be very careful with those 2 words because they will hold you back from becoming the person you intend to be. So we want to make sure that we don't give way to inertia and fear. Okay? Now, she said that when she decided not to give way to fear and inertia, her response was overwhelming. And she said her response was overwhelming because people really want to hear what you have to say. And some of them need help for some of the things that they're going through. So sometimes when we decide to push past that fear, we're opening doors for other people. We're saying what some people really want to say. So I want you to listen as I read tonight. Get your book. If you don't have your book, go on and get your book because I have mine. And I'm going to start off tonight. Remember, I said when you push past it, great things happen. So I want you to listen to this excerpt from the book. Okay? I don't know why, but I'm shaking. For some reason, I'm nervous tonight. And I know that I don't have to be nervous because this is my 4th night doing this. Now, and tonight's topic is finding your voice to help others. Tonight, I'm going to welcome you again to share your information at the end. So if you have something that you'd like to input, something you'd like to discuss at the end, please feel free. I'd love for you to give us some feedback. And that's what I really need because I haven't had any feedback yet at all. And I want to say to you today that your voice matters. You have a voice and your voice matters. Yes, it does. Okay, I'm turning to page 214 in the book. Okay, I already have my pages. I don't know what's taking me so long. Okay. Here we start with First Lady Michelle Obama saying something to her husband. She says, must have been that speech. Must have been a good speech. She said, this became my refrain afterwards. It was a joke between me and Barack, one I repeated often with irony that night, July the 27th, 2014. On that night, he was asked to give the keynote speech for John Kerry in the Democratic National Convention. Okay, so I want you to hear what happened after he did it. I'd left the girls at home with my mom and flown to be with him in Boston for the speech. Standing in the wings at the convention center as Barack stepped into the hot glare of the stage lights and into view of all those millions of people, he was a little nervous, and so was I, though we were both determined not to show it. This was how Barack operated anyway. The more pressure he was under, the calmer he seemed to get. He'd written his remarks over the course of a couple of weeks, working on them in between the Illinois Senate votes. He memorized his words and rehearsed them carefully to the point where he wouldn't actually need a teleprompter unless his nerves got triggered and his mind went blank. But that wasn't at all what happened. Barack looked out at the audience and into the TV cameras as if kick-starting some internal engine. He just smiled and began to roll. He spoke for 17 minutes that night, explaining who he was and where he came from. His grandfather, a GI, I can stand up and read this, who joined the Pathan's army, his grandmother, who'd worked on an assembly line during the war, his father, who'd grown up herding goats in Kenya, his parents' improbable love, their faith in what a good education could do for a son who wasn't born rich or well connected. Earnestly and expertly, he cast himself not as an outsider, but rather as a literal embodiment of the American story. He reminded the audience that a country couldn't be carved up simply into red and blue, that we were united by a common humanity, compelled to care for the whole of society. He called for hope over cynicism. He spoke with hope, projected hope, almost sang it. Really, he almost sang hope. It was 17 minutes of Barack's deft and easy way with words. 17 minutes of his deep, dazzling optimism on display. By the time he finished with the last plug for John Kerry and his running mate, John Edwards, the crowd was on its feet and roaring, the applause booming in the rafters. I walked out onto the stage, stepping into the blinding lights, wearing high heels and a white suit to give Barack a congratulatory hug before turning to wave with him at the whipping audience crowd. The energy was electric. The sound absolutely deafening. That Barack was a good person with a big mind and serious faith in democracy was no longer any part of a secret. It was out. Everybody knew. I was proud of what he'd done, though it didn't surprise me. This was the guy I'd married. I'd known his capabilities all along. Looking back, I think it was then that I quietly began to let go of the idea that there was any reversing his course, that he'd ever belonged solely to the girls and me. I could hear it in the pulse of the applause. More of this, more of this, more of this. That's what they started shouting because of the energy was there. The media's response to Barack's speech was hyperbolic. I just seen the first Black president, Chris Matthews declared to his fellow commentators on NBC. A front page headline in the Chicago Tribune the next day simply read, "The Phenom." Okay? Barack's cell phone began to ring nonstop. Cable pundits were dubbing him a rock star and an overnight success, as if he hadn't spent years working up to that moment on stage. The speech was just the beginning of something new, not just for him, but for us, our whole family. We were swept into another level of exposure and into the swift current of other people's expectations. Remember when I told you if you push past inertia and fear, what happens? That you can go viral? Here's an example of going viral. Here's an example of using your voice. That's why I'm saying to you tonight, you have a voice. Yours may not have gone viral yet, but if you begin to use it in the right times and in the right places, you're going to go viral. That's what I'm hoping for myself also. Now, I want to keep on. I want to read one more point because I want you to see this. It was surreal, the whole thing. All I could do really was joke about it. Must have been that speech, I'd say with a shrug as the people began stopping Barack in the streets to ask for an autograph or to tell him they loved what he said. Must have been that speech, I said, when we were, I'm sorry, I lost my place. When we walked out of a restaurant in Chicago to find that a crowd had gathered on the sidewalks to wait for him. I said that same thing when journalists started asking Barack's thoughts on important national issues, when big-time political strategists started to hover around him, and when 9 years after publication, the formerly obscure Dreams from My Father got a paperback reissue and landed on New York Times bestseller list. Must have been that book. Must have been that speech. I said when a beaming, bustling Oprah Winfrey showed up at our house to spend a day interviewing us for her magazine. I tell you, doors were open. She said this for the time felt like a true and odd measure of his fame. Even white people were recognizing him now. Man, imagine pushing past what you're feeling and moving on and finding your destiny in the middle of it. My. That's something. But I just wanted to give you an example of going viral and you having a voice. Now, I remember, guys, when I started trying to use my voice, I remember being in church. And I used to love the way when one lady got ready to sing, she always gave a powerful testimony. And so as I was growing up, I started walking in her shoes. I'd get ready to sing. And of course, I'd have to give one of my powerful testimonies because it seemed to grab the people. So I started mimicking her. And then I began teaching. And I was the first person in my immediate family to graduate college. So I started my message became, you can learn. I just wanted everybody in my neighborhood, everybody outside of my neighborhood, everybody I could see to know, hey, you can learn. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter your background. You can learn. And I tell you guys, I said it everywhere I went. I sang it at every school that I went to. I started using my voice. And I tell you to this day, I have students coming to me. One little girl just graduated, young lady, just graduated as a lawyer. And I didn't know who she was on Facebook. She said, oh, you don't know who I am? And I've been singing your song for years and years, and it was that song that helped me to be a lawyer, and you don't know who I am? And I was like, oh, baby, please forgive me. But I'm saying to you today, that voice matters. Use it. Use your voice. And I tell you guys, I got so good with it. Also, after I got to be a teacher, I had to take, of course, you guys know you have to take, it was the NTE back in the day. And I had to take some parts of that. Well, I passed some parts, but it was one part, y'all, I didn't pass. had to take one part of that test probably 7 times. 7 times to pass that test. And so what I did, y'all, I got me a sheet of paper and I wrote it, and I passed my test and I wrote the date on it, and I posted it on my mirror. So every day when I went to that mirror, I reminded myself, I hadn't taken the test then, but I reminded myself I passed my test. I kept telling myself over and over and over and over, I passed my test. Well, let me tell you something. When you remind yourself, your body starts to work. I would get off work, fix dinner for the kids, and I'd go straight in the back because my body was passing that test, because I was telling my body every day, you passed that test, you passed that test, and my body started doing it. So y'all, I started confessing it more and more every day. So the time came to take the test. I took the test. I wrote on the test, I passed this test in Jesus' name. I never will forget. I wrote it on top of the test. And the time came. I hadn't gotten my results. And one day my boss walked in and he said, I told him, I said, hey, I passed my test. And he said, good. He said, well, I won't have to give you this note. And I was like, what note? So he showed me the note, and the note said, okay, if you don't pass the test by such and such date, you can't work here anymore. You know, you lose your job. And so I took the test in faith. I took the paper and I threw it in the trash can. And then my nerves was like, girl, you better go get that paper. You know. But anyway, I held on to my confession. Y'all, I told him, he told the school board. The school board started telling people, Miss Dunn passed her test. Everybody was going around saying I had passed my test. I didn't even have my results. But y'all, when the time came, I passed that test. And that turned into something else for me. Our children have to take a national test every year. So I became the motivator for the test, because I knew if I could pass my test, my students could pass their test. So I started making confessions for them. So I was the motivator. So I'm saying I'm still using my voice to motivate, because that's what God gave it to me for. So I was the motivator at every school I went to. The principals didn't have to worry. They would let me have my way, because they knew that was something I loved doing. And I did a great job of it. And I tell you, kids passed those tests. They started writing their confessions, and they started saying it, and they passed their test also. So you have a voice. Use your voice. And don't wait to go to church to use your voice. You can use your voice at the corner store, at Walmart. You can use your voice at the bus stop. You can use your voice anywhere. On Facebook, I'm using my voice tonight. You can use your voice on Facebook. So use your voice. Now, let me get back into the book. Enough of me. Let's read a little further and see when the former first lady found her voice, because I know you're interested in that. Okay. Now, I just have to say, I want to pull this out. I think that when she met, let me see. I just have to say this. Remember, when she met Barack, she was already successful. She talks about the sob that she had in the book. And she was at home. She was paying off her student loans. She was in a lawyer's firm already. It was Sydney and something else. I'll pull it up later. But she was already doing her thing. So she was already successful. And she meets him, okay? And his heart is for the community. She meets this guy, and his heart is for the community. And he wants to help people. That's where his heart was. Remember, she's the organized person. She's already got what she's got. She's already in the high-paying job. She's good. She's paying off her student loans. But I really believe that her relationship with him was a turning point in her life. I think it turned her back, because she even talks about Chicago in a different light, because, she went off to Princeton, but she talks about Chicago in a different light. She started seeing things differently. And I also will say, or she came back to herself. Because in the book, she talks about her father being she doesn't call him an organizer, but he did go they did go to knock door to door in the communities and and the people were able to talk to him about their frustrations in the city. So it was like she was going back to her roots to me. But Barack took her back. And if Michelle, if I'm wrong, let me know. Okay. And then her father dies. She's still at the firm when her father dies. But this is kind of the turning point in her life. And this is when she decides life is too short. I don't want to be in a big building, a high-rise building, shuffling papers all day. I'd rather be somewhere where I can help people. And that's where she began to move. So she started moving toward other jobs. Okay. She meets this guy in the community. Well, no. In her quest for the new job / career, she's introduced to Susan Shur. And I'm sure you guys have heard the name Susan Shur because she's the former chief of staff for the former First Lady. Now, she's going to Shur for a job, okay? But in the end, she ends up taking Shur to Washington with her, okay? So that's why I'm saying be the best you can be too. Then somebody might come and pull you from where you are and take you to another destiny, okay? Now, also, Shur points her to Valarie Jarrett, and I'm sure you guys have heard the name Valarie Jarrett. And at that time, Valarie is working for the mayor Washington of Chicago, of the city of Chicago, and he was the first African American mayor. So she's in his office. But let me tell you something about both of those ladies. Both of them had law degrees. And now Shur didn't give hers up. Shur was she was working law in the city. But Valarie had given hers up to be the what was she? To work with the mayor. She had given hers up. But they were still they had turned into people persons. They liked working with people more than sitting behind a desk. They wanted to make a mark in the world. So they wanted to touch the lives of people. Now, and I did say that already, those who hired her, now she was able to hire them. Okay. Now, I want you to go to page 236 if you have your book. I've already got mine marked off. Okay. Did I say? No. I'm sorry. I'm going to 148. Please forgive me. Okay. This is when she meets Susan. Okay. She says, Susan was about 15 years older than I was. She'd been a partner at a big firm, but had ultimately bailed out of the corporate world, just as I was hoping to do, though she was still practicing law with the Chicago city government. And she said she was gently confident and highly accomplished and would become a lifelong friend. That's her description of Shur. Okay. And then she said Valarie Jarrett was a newly appointed deputy chief of staff to the mayor of Chicago and had deep connections across the city's African American community. Like Susan, she'd been smart enough to land herself a job in a blue chip firm after law school and had been self-aware enough to realize that she wanted out. So we got two of them that want out of three that wanted out of the corporate world. Okay. She moved to City Hall largely because she was inspired by Harold Washington. And like I told you guys, he was the first African American president, mayor. Okay. On page 150 in the book, she says, Valarie was calm, bold, and wise in ways that few people I'd met before were. She was someone to learn from, to stick close to. I saw this right away. Okay. And on page 168, let's go to 168. And I just want to pull this up just for women, just for you guys to hear, not just for women, but just to let you know how important the right company is. That is so important. When you're moving towards something, moving towards your goal, you got to have the right people in your life. This is what she says. Susan Shur and Valarie Jarrett, two women who I was seeing, managed to be both tremendously confident and tremendously human at the same time. Tremendously confident and tremendously human. Okay. Susan ran meetings with a steely and unflappable grace. Valarie thought nothing of speaking her mind in a room full of opinionated men, often managing to deftly bring people around to whatever she was arguing. She was like a fast-moving comet, someone who was clearly going places. So you got to be right people. And I want to say this part because I've got to piggyback on the mother part because I'm a mother. She says, I saw more of Valarie than I did of Susan. But I took careful notes of everything each of them did. Similarly to how I observed Zernie, my college mentor. These were women who knew their own voices. These were women who knew their own voices and were unafraid to use them. They could be humorous and humble when the moment called for it, but they were unfazed by blowhards and didn't second guess the power in their own points of views. Also, importantly, they were working moms. Somebody say working moms. They were working moms. I watched them closely in this regard as well, knowing that I wanted someday to be one myself. Valarie never hesitated to step out of a big meeting when a call came in from her daughter's school. Susan likewise dashed out in the middle of the day if one of her sons spiked a fever or was performing a preschool musical. They were unapologetic about prioritizing the needs of their children. I love that because we can't apologize. We are mothers and we do have to do what we have to do for our kids. We really do. Now, I just want to move on because my time is about to run out and I don't want to be here over my time. So I want to go over to page 236 and I want you to see when the First Lady found her voice. Okay? And then I'm going to let you guys go. Okay. Okay, I'm on 236, the second paragraph. My first solo campaign event took place in early April inside a modest home in Desmond. A few dozen people had collected in the living room, sitting on the couches and folded chairs that had been brought in for the occasion, while others sat cross-legged on the floor. As I scanned the room, she started looking around the room, preparing to speak. What I observed probably shouldn't have surprised me, but it did, at least a little. Laid out on the end tables were the same sorts of white crochet dollies that my grandmother Shields used to have at her house. And I know y'all had them because I had them at my house too, those crochet things at the end of the tables. So she's saying she saw those, okay? I spotted porcelain figures. That was another thing. We called them whatnots back in the day, okay? That looked just like the ones Robbie had kept on her shelves downstairs from us on Euclid Avenue. A man in the front row was smiling at me warmly. I was in awe, but I had the distinct feeling of being at home. Iowans, I was really realizing, were nothing but Shields and Robinsons. They didn't suffer fools. They didn't trust people who put on airs. They could sniff out a phony a mile away. Y'all, this is the most important thing to take away right here. She said, my job, I realized, was to be myself, to speak as myself. And so I did. They're not looking for a counterfeit. They're looking for you. They just want you to be you. And if you can't be you, you don't need to be around them anyway. She says, let me tell you about me. I'm Michelle Obama, raised on the south side of Chicago in a little apartment on the top floor of a two-story house that felt like this one. She's talking to the people. My dad was a water pump operator for the city. My mom stayed at home and raised me and my brother. She said, I talked about everything, about my brother and the values we were raised with, about this hotshot lawyer I met at work, the guy who'd stolen my heart with his groundedness and his vision for the world, the man who left his socks lying around the house that morning and sometimes snored in his sleep. I told them about how I was keeping my job at the hospital, about how my mother was picking up my girls from school that day. I didn't sugarcoat my feelings about politics. The political world was no place for good people, I said, explaining why I'd been conflicted about whether Barack should run at all, worried about what the spotlight might do to our family. But I was standing before them because I believed in my husband and what he could do. I knew how much he read and how deeply he thought about things. I said that he was exactly the kind of smart, decent president I would choose for this country, even if selfishly I'd rather have kept him closer to home all these years. As weeks went by, I want you to hear this, because sometimes we think we got to change our story. You don't have to change your story. People want to hear that story. She says, as weeks went by, I'd tell that same story in Davenport, in Cedar Rapids, in Council Bluff, in Sioux City, in Marshalltown, in Muscatine, in bookstores, in union halls, a home for aging military veterans, and as the weather warmed up, on front porches, in public parks. Listen to this. The more I told my story, the more my voice settled in itself. I liked my story. And you know what? I like my story. I like the fact that I'm from the south side of Monroe also. I like the fact that my grandfather decided to keep me when he could have said, no, go on and take her to the orphanage. Her mother's not here. They said he got on an airplane and said, no, I'm going to bring her back because she's a part of me. Embrace your story. Stop running from it. It's a good story. That story is what made you who you are today. And somebody wants to hear it. And this is where I'm going to end tonight because I am over my time. Now, if you'd like to say something really quickly, if you'd like to share something, I'm looking over on the right, please feel free. Please feel free. I'm looking. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You have a voice. Find your voice. Find your voice and use it. Have a great night. Thanks. See you guys next Monday.